Excitement and gratitude to you that I'd like to open up the first public face-to-face event that the Global Urban History Project has put on. In this case, it's also the first of what we hope to be many synergies between Guhp, as we're calling it, and other organizations that have similar interest and allied interest, and so we're very, very grateful to SACRPH and to David Freund, who's right here on the committee for accepting the idea of having us come and conduct this first step. As I'll tell you,
it's an absolute no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer, says David Freund. Well, that's good because he's got a lot of brains. And anyway, I'll tell you just a little bit about the project to begin with, and then allow the panelists to say a lot more about what it means to them. It's a very short, very young thing. It started back in a conversation back in February, and then became a real thing in May with its website. Shortly after a board of directors, and since then, a membership of north of 220 people who have come from basically all around the world, from associations of very, very diverse associations. And this was one of our main interests, was to bring people who are thinking about global urban history from many in places that didn't necessarily coincide with the main urban history associations or the main world history associations or global history associations. So that's happened, and that we're super excited to know that there is a thing that is global urban history. People have identified with it, and they've come to the site, and they have also, along the way, provided us with their work or citations to their work. So we have several thousand citations of work that also prove and help to clarify the extent of this field. We're going to be building that into a bibliographic project. Mariana may speak a little bit about it. I don't know if that's what is part of the remarks today. Over the course of the year, we're also going to be using that information as a way to promote to a wider public, even, the existence of this field and some of the work in that field. This is also just the first stop on a tour of conferences that we'll be doing that go around the world. So it's our Roundtables Around the World initiative. This is stop one in Cleveland, Ohio. We'll be showing up at the Organization of American Historians in Sacramento next April. We'll be moving to Japan, Yokohama, Japan, for the IPHS conference. There we'll be actually doing a mini conference within the conference there with 5 or 6 panels. And we'll talk to several of you about that as we go along. For people who might be going to that conference. And then we'll end the tour in this first academic year in Rome, in Italy, in August at the European Association of Urban Historians, where we hope to have a panel meeting where urban historians and global historians actually have a chat together. And so that'll be the first of those. That will then be by that point we'll have a very clear idea of what we're going to be doing next, which will probably almost definitely involve more of this kind of traveling conference idea. So the idea will be we're going to go to urban historians around the world, especially urban historians who are thinking about cities and their connections to the broader world. Just quickly, global urban history, and then I'll let other people speak because I don't want to keep on going, but the basic bumper sticker that we're using as our definition of the field is anybody who's interested in cities as creations or creators of larger scale historical phenomena. So that's one way of looking at it, or just anybody who's interested in having a conversation at the crossroads between urban history and global history. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers all at once and then have them go from there. The cool thing about these speakers is that they're not only speakers at a panel, but they're actually almost living evidence of the history, the short history of Guhp. And they tell us a little, each of them has a different angle on how this came into being. Our first speaker, Emma Hart, is a senior lecturer at St. Andrews University. She's written this fabulous book called Building Charleston. which was out in 2010 and came paperback in 2015. And our second speaker is Mariana Dantes, who's associate professor at Ohio University, who's written a terrific book called A Black Townsman, Urban Slavery and Freedom in the 18th Century Americas, from 2008. And the two of them, in some ways, are the founding mothers of this whole initiative, because they got a ton of money from the UK government several years back to start building a network of people interested in global cities called Global Cities Past and Present. That network occasionally involved me and other people who were in this room, and then eventually they came to a point where, well, so we're supposed to create a network, what's the next step? And they called me up and I said, well, let's get together with a couple other network people and build something even bigger. And so we immediately emailed the next person who's going to speak, who is Michael Guhp, who's up here from Berlin. Sorry, Emma is in Edinburgh just now in her own kitchen, and Michael is in his living room in Berlin, looking out at us. And Michael Michael had been running with Tracy Newman and Joseph Prestel a fabulous thing called the Global Urban History blog. And so they were willing to join their networks, which had grown considerably over the time, with the network that Emma and Mariana had been building. And then finally, we knew that we desperately needed Nancy Kwok on board. And so we had Nancy come, and the two of us filled in whatever little bits and pieces that we felt we needed to make this then into a truly global urban history project. So Nancy, who is the author of Home Ownership for All, American Power and the Politics of Housing Aid post-1945, and is a professor at the University of California, San Diego, as almost everybody here I'm sure knows, and so that's happening. The other great thing is that we also have some of what we hope is the future of the Global Urban History Project in Emilio D'Antoniano Villarreal, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Chicago. Spent it last year as a fellow in the Center for U.S.-Mexico Studies at Cal San Diego as well, and who is the author of a dissertation called Building a Megalopolis, the Politics of Planning in Mexico City, 1930-1960. And he'll be talking to us about what this means to him as well. So I'm going to shut up and get out of the limelight, and we're going to move to Emma first and then on to the others in the order that I just introduced them. Thanks.
Okay, so we're all going to talk to the same set of questions, basically, in our short presentations to kick off the discussion. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is how Mariana and I ended up, or how I personally came to setting up a network on the Global City Past and Present. And so first of all, as Carl mentioned, my first book was called Building Charleston, and it's a history of Charleston, South Carolina in the 18th century and its growth as a British Atlantic urban entity. And I wrote it because a big influence for me writing it was that so much early American urban history assumed that early America's colonial cities were exceptional, and this was actually a word used by a very famous historian of the era, Carl Nightingale, and this idea of these places being exceptional really lasted until the 1990s and the 2000s. So I wanted to look at Charleston not as an exceptional city, but as a city that was part of a transatlantic world of urban growth in the 18th century. And so I looked at issues like planning, building the city, land speculation, and economic growth, and found out really that although Charleston was of course exceptional in many ways, with its large enslaved population, it was also very much part of what's been called an urban renaissance in the English-speaking world in the 18th century. And so I realized that I was one of the few people looking across the Atlantic to study early North American history, and then also having conversation with Mariana about her work, which was comparing Brazil and North America. I realised, of course, that just looking at the British Atlantic was also rather short-sighted, that I should actually be looking at the whole Atlantic and not just the British Atlantic world. And so Mariana and I started a conversation about bringing historians together who are working on the early modern period, on cities in the early modern period, beyond the sort of customary boxes into which this history is placed. And we were supported by many great people, including Guhp, who was a former colleague of Mariana's at Ohio, and also Matthew Davis, who was the director of the Centre for Metropolitan History at the Institute for Historical Research in London. And together we applied for this AHRC, which is the UK NEH basically. We applied for this networking grant, which allowed us to have these 3 workshops around the world, and to invite really whoever we wanted and have them come from around the world to the places where we had the workshop. So the explicit goals of this network were, first of all, as I said, to cross continents, to bring historians, early modern historians together who were working on completely different continents to discuss their research on urban history. But then also our second main goal was to connect the early modern to the modern. So we wanted to cross this sort of notional divide of 1850 and get people who work on the late 19th and 20th century to talk to people who were working on that previous era. And as Carl said, he very enthusiastically participated in this project. It was really great that I literally cold emailed him and he agreed to participate. Wonderful. And so that's really how the Global Cities thing started, Mariana and I, and how we ended up, as Carl said, as part of the Guhp. So what have I learned from the first 6 months of being part of this project? Where's it going from now? So I would focus my comments really on my perspective as an early modernist, as a pre-1800 historian, and I certainly noticed that so many of the conversations, for example, conversations at the conference you're at right now, I looked at the program, of course, it's overwhelmingly post-1890 in content. And I keep on seeing issues or topics in the program that I know that I'm talking about as well. For example, I saw one panel that was focusing on public space and private interest and ownership, and this is an issue that I've been very interested in cities in the 18th century already in America. So I'm convinced that we need to connect together and across the chronological divide, and I think the Global Urban History Project is going to enable us to do this. And I would underline that I think this failure to connect previously is the fault of early modernists very much too, who are interested in global history but are very bad at connecting it to urban history. And I think the other thing that has made me realise that the early modernists need to do not just sort of stand up and wait there, say, hello, we're here, what about before 1850? We have to have a strong idea of what we can contribute to this project, and that's what I'm still is work in progress for me in formulating. I think as far as I've got is the thought that a long global urban history has the potential to bring new understanding of the problems and issues addressed by 20th century historians, because I think that focusing on the 17th and 18th century as we do, we're looking at a moment when transnational connections first began to circulate through cities on a really major scale, and we can look at how urban people and populations first dealt with these extensive connections. So finally, I wanted to just talk about what I hope the project can bring to my own field or subfield, what I hope will happen with my own work in light of this. I think, so my third book project is going to be a long history of the urban-rural divide in the United States, starting, I think, at the latest in the 1760s and ending in the 1890s at the very earliest. And of course, this project has made me realise because I read Mikhail's blog post on urban-rural divides on his GUH blog back in 2016. I realised that this is a concern of others as well, and it's made me think that I really need to write this book in a comparative and transnational context to answer this question of whether there's anything really special about the US urban-rural divide, as well as to ponder how this divide unfolded over the centuries of America's past. And I'm hoping that this project will enable me to make the connections, perhaps to apply for a large collaborative grant, and give me the springboard to make this come to pass, which I think would be much harder without the existence of this project. So really that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much, contemporary planning historians, for listening to an 18th century urban historian. I'm delighted to be here, well, here and there, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone else has to say.